Okay, we're starting up the second lecture, which is food security, and we'll take a look at some of the differences or highlights within here. One of the things we mentioned is what is a food security? A food security is a group of people having enough, not necessarily calories, but in addition to that, the nutrients that they need on a daily basis. Obviously, there's a lot of people in the world that do not have this. So we went through this. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here on this, but the idea is that different people spend a certain portion of their money on food, and even though we're just mentioning here as far as this value, what we don't see in here is just a comparative number. But what percentage of this is their income that they're bringing in? But one of the things just to kind of take a look at as we're sliding through these is just being able to identify food. That sounds kind of obvious, but for example, I can tell those are tomatoes. I may not be able to identify all these by names. This is some type of a citrus, but I can see that that is citrus. We have tomatoes, we have a watermelon, we have bananas, we have bread. I can see all these things, and I can identify that it as actually food, not processed. So over here, for example, cornflakes is a processed food, crackers and such. So here we have Guatemala. Again, I can pretty much identify everything out there as some type of a whole food. You go over to Mali, $30 a week, and that's US money. And pretty much what that buys is obviously a variety of grains. They have some fruits, and that's probably something very, very special, and probably is one of the more expensive things within all of this here, fresh fruit. India, again, I can pretty much identify everything on here except for maybe this bottle of soda here, whatever that happens to be. China, the same thing. All this looks like real food except for some of these drinks and such we have sitting over here, and they looks like they kind of actually have separated those out to say, okay, this is the extra stuff that we have, but the rest of it looks like real food. And then we skip over to the Americans, and here it's just the exact opposite. Here's the real food in the middle, grapes, a couple tomatoes, and pretty much everything else you see on this table is in one way or another a processed food. So this goes to the idea that we live this great experiment that let's see what this food actually does to us. It's very heavily processed and contributes to the fact that we have this thing here. Misinformation is that, well, to eat fresh food and real products would be very, very expensive. I would argue it's actually the opposite. The amount of processed foods that we have, and of course all this fast food, Burger King and pizzas and such, really brings up the price. If you deal with raw ingredients and eat that, I would argue that would be probably at most half of this $342. And the last example here is Chad, and this is just painfully ridiculous. The amount of money that they are able to spend and the amount of food that they have. Obviously, just terrible. Moving along, the same idea. We can see this little guy here. He's collecting ants, not because they're fun to play with, but because the food that they need. This is where a lot of people get nutrition. We in the Western hemisphere and Western Europe and such, we are some of the very few cultures that actually don't eat insects. They're very nutritious, but for I would agree, obvious reasons, it's kind of gross, but it certainly doesn't make sense why we don't when you think of the nutritional value. World hunger, as you would probably guess looking at some of these locations where you're going to find world hunger, the vast majority of Africa, over 35% of the people living there, are undernourished, and we'll look at a number what that represents here in just a second. Looking at degraded croplands, what we may not guess is looking at the United States, 7% of our soils are listed as degraded, and another portion doesn't mention that's, very degraded soils. 7% are very degraded, and another larger percentage is simply degraded. So the vast majority of our croplands are either very or somewhat degraded. And then you look around the world, we're all kind of in the same scenario. So as far as helping children and starvation and malnutrition, some of the things that we could do. There's some nice little lists for you as far as some of the solutions that we have. We should all be somewhat aware of what these things could be. Two of them is, one is nutrition, the other one is just population. So, nutrition requirements. What would be listed as undernutrition? Something you need to know. 2,000 calories, which is quite a high number, but I would argue that most of us are able to maintain at least 2,000 calories a day. So, undernutrition, less than 2,000 calories. Malnutrition means you're getting the calories, but you're not necessarily getting the balance of the proteins, the vitamins, the minerals, the other things that would make us healthy. A lot of us here in the United States, we actually suffer from overnutrition. We have too many calories, and we don't have a proper balance of nutrition. One of the things that's to keep in mind, and this is important for the test, is we get the vast majority of our calories from wheat, corn, and rice. These three substances provide the vast majority of our calories. And it's not that we're eating rice and corn straight. It's usually somewhere within our food supply. Corn is in just about every meal we eat, whether we know it or not. Looking at global undernutrition, we can see even since 1995, it's gone up quite a considerable amount. Now, sometimes the graphs are a little bit misleading. We're starting here at 800, not necessarily 0. So we can see that it's gone up, about 25% or so in that time period. So looking at our diets again, we can see that we have overnutrition as a problem. We can see that Americans are, about 60% of us are overweight and 33% of us are listed as obese. That's obviously some pretty high numbers. What that actually, lists, what does the mark, where is the mark for determining if a person is overweight or obese? I don't have those numbers. So the main idea just to hold on to is we're doing pretty good as far as the availability of food, in many ways too good. Something a little bit disturbing is, we spend a good deal of money every single year trying to lose weight, where if we just took half of that money, gave it to the rest of the world, or just simply stopped eating so much or bad food, we could eliminate the world hunger problem. That does create another problem. I completely understand this, and it's very difficult subject to talk about, is feeding everyone that is hungry, the population will continue to go up, and that's a very, very difficult conversation to have. All right, the industrial food production that we have here, this is pretty much normal as far as how we eat today. As far as Americans, we don't necessarily, many people do not necessarily buy raw ingredients to make food so much as they buy meals. They buy the lasagna, they buy the pizza. They go to Costco and they buy the pre-made fish sticks, whatever it is you want to talk about. We don't typically buy the raw ingredients and make food as much as we did once upon a time. This increases the amount of energy that goes into the process, the amount of fertilizers, pesticides to ensure a safe product. Looking at the different types of methods as far as how we grow our food, we can see that the developed countries have very much moved into an industrial process in putting their food together, where in some locations which we would consider developing, you can see that they're either more of a nomadic system or that they're shifting their cultivation from one means to another. So the main point of this is the industrialized version that us, the United States, and a great deal of Europe and Asia have taken on. Externalities. This is the unintended effects of a process. So, we may want to go out and industrialize our crops, but there's good and bad things in which that go along with that. So it's not necessarily just the bad things, but in environmental science, we typically focus on the negative externalities that go along with a system. All right, we're almost about 10 minutes into this lecture, so I will call it quits at lecture number 2, and we'll move on to lecture number 3.